It is the start of February, which means the start of the F1 season is right around the corner. And so it has come time for me to make my predictions. In keeping with tradition, I will go through my predictions for the Drivers' Championship, the Constructors' Championship, and then at the end, some hot takes that I have for the season. Starting off, similar to my 2024 predictions, even though I said at the end of the year that I wouldn't do it again, I do have 21 drivers in my drivers' predictions. Unfortunately for Jack Doohan, it just seems like a foregone conclusion that he's going to be dropped at some point during the season for Franco Colapinto. And so I don't think it would be right to not have both of them in my predictions. I feel really bad for Jack because he is one of my favorite junior drivers that has kind of come through the last few years, but the writing's on the wall and it's very disappointing. But in what might be a bit of a hot take, I don't have Jack Doohan in P21. I have Gabriele Bortoleto. I am not sure that Sauber is going to be able to get points once again. I'm predicting that they're going to have the worst car, and so I think it'll be tough for both him and Hulkenberg, who I have in P20, to get any points throughout 2025. If they do, good for them, but yeah. I don't think this will have any impact on Gabby's ability to get a seat in the following year, though, because I think that he's going to have a lot of grace with this team, and I think he's a pretty exciting prospect from the fact that he won both F3 and F2 in his rookie season, so kind of following in the footsteps of Charles and George and Oscar. He's quite a talent, and hopefully Sauber will be able to foster that like they did with Charles. And yeah, as mentioned, I have Nico in P20 because Nico's a very good qualifier, but if that car isn't good, I don't know how much he can get out of it. Kind of in a similar vein to Valtteri Bottas. And if Valtteri can't get anything out of it, then I don't have much more faith in Nico than that. So that's kind of where I'm at with the Sauber pairing. So then in P19, I do have Jack Doohan. As we will see in my constructors' predictions, I do think that Alpine is going to have a better year than they did in 2024. Alpine was able to have a very miraculous ending to that season, and I think if they can carry that forward into 2025, I think they will have a car that is capable of points at the start of the season. And for that reason, I do think that Jack Doohan is going to be able to get points within those first 5 races that he has, but I don't think he'll get much more than that, and I think it will still be enough to stay ahead of the Sauber drivers for the year. In P18, I made a bit of a last-minute change. I had this person further down initially, but I don't know. I'm so on the fence about a lot of the predictions this year. There's no real way of knowing how things will go, but I have Isaac Hadjar in P18. I am a little bit worried for him. I'm not too sure if he is going to be mentally ready for F1. I think we've seen him in the past. He can sometimes lose out at the end of seasons because he loses out under pressure. His F2 championship kind of went that way, and I believe in the past he was also leading another one in the championships and let it kind of fall off at the end. So I am a little bit worried about his mental fortitude in that way, and especially if he's a little bit rough around the edges like Yuki was to start his career, it's going to be tough for him. So I think he'll be able to get points, and at least he'll probably last longer than Jack Doohan, but whether or not he gets the full season will remain to be seen. And in P17, I have Yuki Tsunoda. Unfortunately, the Racing Bulls car is a piece of crap, and I also have no faith in that team to be able to make a good strategy call or operationally be any good. They really tailed off at the end of 2024, and I don't have any faith in this team. And unfortunately for Yuki, I think it's going to be tougher for him to get points with some of the drivers that are kind of around him, and the cars that are probably going to improve into this season. So yeah, unfortunately not have much faith in Yuki this year. Next up in P16, I have Alex Albon. And Albon, I foresee him doing better than he did in 2024, but not quite as good as he did in 2023. I think Williams will hopefully have a better start to the year in 2025 than in 2024, and not get into so many crashes and cost them a lot of money and development money for the year. But I do know that Williams is very focused on the regulations for 2026 and not necessarily 2025. So I do think they'll still be kind of towards the back of the grid, but they do have a really good driver lineup now. And so maybe with Carlos coming in with fresh ideas and a fresh perspective, he might be able to push them in a better way for this season in 2025. And speaking of Carlos, I have him in P15. I do think it might take him a little bit of time to get up to speed with that Williams car, especially since he's used to a much more superior Ferrari car. But I do think that over the course of the season, he's going to outperform Albon, just because I think he's a little bit more hardened. He's had harder teammates to fight against, and we just don't really know how Albon is going to do against a proven teammate. And so I do think over the course of the season, Carlos is going to come out on top in that battle. Next up in P14, I have Lance Stroll. And honestly, like, this is just going to be about where the Aston Martin is. I don't really have faith that Lance is going to really push the car to be any better than it is. And I think, like Williams, I think Aston Martin is really preparing for 2026 with Honda joining them. So I don't really trust that Lance is going to do much better. And we've kind of seen over 2024 that I don't see any signs of life from him in a sense. In years past, you would sometimes get the odd really good performance out of him, but in 2024, those were almost completely non-existent. So good luck to that man, forever holding on to a seat for someone more deserving. And next up in P13, I have Franco Colapinto. He's this low partially because if he's going to be missing at least part of the season, he's not going to be able to attain points then, so it's going to kind of cost him in the overall standings by the end of the year. But I do think that he's going to do better in a car that is less prone to crashing, and we saw that he has quite good pace, so I expect that he will get acclimated quite quickly, having already had some F1 experience, and be able to put that car into the points if it is a points deserving car. And next in P12, I have Ollie Behrman. We've already seen that Ollie is fully prepared for F1. I think out of all of the rookies this year, even if you consider Liam Lawson a rookie, I think I have the most faith in Ollie doing well. I think he's already proven that he can handle the pressure, and he's already gotten points, so that kind of pressure is off of him. And Haas seemed to really love him and his input, and so I see him doing quite well in a Haas car that was much improved in 2024, and I expect them to continue that into 2025. And then in P11, I have Ollie's teammate, Esteban Ocon. I do think that he's going to outperform Ollie. I just think that the experience that Esteban has will allow him to outperform Ollie. I think Ollie might still make some mistakes here and there, and so I think Esteban will get the better of him over the course of the season. And now we're into the top 10, and in P10, I have Fernando Alonso. The Aston Martin car really tailed off at the tail end of 2024, but even with that, I just can't see Fernando finishing any lower than this. I think he just has that ability to perform with a car no matter the quality of that car, and he can always pull a shock result out of it. And so I do expect him to manage to squeak into the top 10, but we'll have to see, because if that Aston Martin continues to be on the decline, it might be tough even for him. And in P9, which is now the best of the rest spot, I do have Pierre Gasly. I think at the end of 2024, we saw Pierre return to the quality of driver that he used to be at AlphaTauri. Just the qualifying performances were there. He squeaked out that podium at Brazil and had a couple more top 5 qualifyings in the last few races. And so if that kind of performance continues, I can see him being one of those drivers that's just always at the tail end of the points and always collecting those points here and there. And there is one of my hot takes that we'll get to later that I also think will help him get into this position. Next up in P8, I do have Kimi Antonelli. I think that Kimi is a fantastic talent, but we are going to see him go through some of the growing pains that we saw Max Verstappen go through when he first started F1. I don't expect that Mercedes to be very good. I think they've probably also written off this set of regulations and are focusing more on the 2026 regulations, where I do expect them to be quite well, considering that the last time there was an engine reg change, they were on top for 8 years. So I think they are fully leaning into doing the best they can for those regs, and so they might have figured some things out for this car, but I don't expect them to develop it very much, and for that reason I do think that they're going to be kind of the 4th best team throughout the course of the year, and I think Kimi will just with some of those mistakes, will probably lose out on some points to his teammate. Next up in P7, I do have Liam Lawson. I think that Liam will do better than Sergio did in that car. I think he has a little bit more of a proven ability to adapt to different cars, and I don't know. I mean, I'm sure he wants to win a championship, but he might have a little bit more of a realistic approach to it, considering that he's maybe thinking, what if Max moves on in the future? And he kind of wants to set himself up to be the next guy for Red Bull. And so I don't know how much he'll push back on Max's championship fight, but I do think he'll be up there a little bit more frequently than Sergio was. But unfortunately, with the talent at the top of the field, and also with the fact that I don't think that the Red Bull is going to be as dominant as it has been the last few years, I think he'll suffer in the standings, and so I see him finishing P7. Next up is P6, and I see George Russell taking that spot. As mentioned with Kimi, I just think this is where the Mercedes is at, and I just don't think that George is going to have the tools to be able to fight with the 5 drivers ahead of him. I do expect that Mercedes will get a win within the season, especially seeing their performance at Las Vegas, and if that kind of cold temperature race comes up, I'm sure Mercedes will capitalize on that. So that will kind of help George get into that spot in the standings, but I don't see any way where he could finish any higher than this. All right, here are the top 5. And if you have been following my channel, you would have known that I have put out a video kind of discussing the top 5 and the pros and cons of each. And I went back and forth a lot on this top 5. I'm still not confident in it, if I'm being honest, but I think this is where I have landed. And so my P5 is Oscar Piastri. At the middle of the 2024 season, during that stretch in the European races up to Baku, Oscar looked like a championship winning driver. He was taking wins off of Lando with incredible passes, and he had seemed to figure something out qualifying wise and tire management wise, and it was looking really good for him. But then as soon as McLaren started to favor Lando a little bit more because of Lando's title fight, Oscar seemed to lose a bit of motivation. And so that is kind of what I would think would cause the loss of motivation. But if it was burnout or something like that, then that is something that's a little bit worrying to me. So I think over the course of a full season, we haven't seen Oscar be able to be consistent yet. I don't think that he has quite enough experience yet to be able to put in a championship run. Now, he has the talent to be able to prove me completely wrong, and I'm sure he knows that this might be one of his only chances at a championship, and so maybe he'll be hyper-focused and and go into a mental state that we haven't seen from him in F1 yet, but I think I just worry that he hasn't quite figured everything out yet, and so I think he's going to be a little bit behind the people ahead of him. Next up in P4. This is the one that I'm like, I just don't know, honestly. I've been going back and forth on it so much. This has the potential to be the one that I get completely wrong, and that is Lewis Hamilton. My reasoning for this is that I think it will take him a little bit of time to get acclimated with the Ferrari team and get acclimated with that new car at the start of the season. I also have concerns about his qualifying pace, and it's kind of unclear as of right now whether that was an issue specifically with the Mercedes car or if it's an issue with these aero regulations, or if it's Lewis's age finally starting to hit him. There's just too many question marks there. And I think this year in particular, since I do expect the cars to be very close in performance, I think qualifying performance is going to be a big differentiating factor between who does well in races and who doesn't. And so for that reason, I do think that Lewis is going to lose out a little bit more than the people ahead of him. Now, he could figure something out, be the Lewis Hamilton that we know he can be, and completely prove me wrong and dominate the season because he's in a car that could win again. But I think there's too many question marks there for me to put him any higher than this in the standings. Next up, in P3, for the first time in 2 years, I have Max Verstappen, who is not going to be the championship winner this year. I am concerned about that Red Bull car. Max only managed to win 2 races in it in the second half of the season. Brazil was unlucky in qualifying and then miraculous in the race, although miraculous, but also showing his talent. But without the rain, I doubt he would have won that race. I think if Red Bull continues that kind of performance with its car, it might be tough for Max to win consistently enough to finish higher than this in the standings. The Red Bull's best tracks, though, seem to be at the start and end of the year. They're usually good around Bahrain, around Qatar, around Saudi Arabia, around Miami. And so I think that he might get off to a hot start, but I think once again, through that middle section of the year, I think other cars are going to perform better. And so I think without that big buffer of race wins that he had at the start of 2024, it's going to be tough for him to win the championship. So we'll see if he proves me wrong. He usually does. And so that's where I have Max. Next up, in P2, I have Lando Norris. We finally kind of got to see how Lando would handle the pressure of a championship fight in 2024, as much as it wasn't a real championship fight. But we saw at the start that he was making so many mistakes and he was kind of losing it under pressure, especially when he had pole. And he did get better at that by the end of the year, but not enough for me to kind of say that it is completely eliminated from his mindset. My other feeling with him is that he still hasn't fully figured out how to be consistent over the course of a full year. He has some races where he was making little mistakes or getting like a P5, P6 finish, making mistakes like not knowing the rule book in Qatar or in Brazil that had the potential to cost him quite a lot of positions. If the McLaren and the Ferrari are very close in performance, if he's making these kinds of mistakes, it's going to cost him over the course of the season. If we look at the driver ahead of him, I think comparatively, Lando is going to lose out in that respect. So that's why I have him in P2. The McLaren might be the best car in 2025, but I don't think that's going to mean much this season. I think this season is very much going to come down to driver talent. And so that means, and I might rue this decision by the end of the year, because it's the same decision I made in 2022. And that is the winner of the Drivers' Championship in 2025. Charles Leclerc. Charles Leclerc, for me, was the best driver in 2024 in terms of consistency. He finished top 5 in every single race that year, except for that 4-race gap in the middle where Ferrari completely went the wrong direction car development wise. But other than that, Charles was always finishing top 5. He wasn't getting into these silly little battles that Max and Lando were. He was just driving, getting the most out of the car that he could, week in, week out. And so I have more faith in his consistency than I do Lando, and even Max to an extent. I think he can have a higher level of consistency, but if there's going to be more on-track battles this year, like we saw in 2024, I think that's going to cost Max, because Max very much has a aggressive crash or lose kind of headspace. I think Charles, one, I think his racecraft is a little bit better than Max in terms of wheel-to-wheel combat. 2, if Charles and Max are in wheel-to-wheel combat, they're not going to crash because they know each other too well, or it's less likely that they will crash because they know how to drive against each other so much better than Max does with any other driver because of their history and because of their youth. And so Max against Lewis, potential for fireworks there. Max versus Lando, potential for fireworks there. Max versus George, definite fireworks there. But Max versus Charles, less so. And so while Max might get the better of Charles, or maybe not, at least they're not crashing. And so if Max is getting into some of these battles with these other drivers and they do collide and they do have issues of each other pushing each other off the track and that kind of thing, it's going to cost Max at 1 or 2 races of the year. And if Charles can just put in these consistent race finishes, race after race, without kind of getting caught up in that drama, I think it's going to benefit him over the course of the year. The only thing that concerns me about putting Charles this high is that I'm not 100% confident that their car is going to be as good as McLaren. I think Ferrari was very lucky to be able to win the races that they did in 2024. I think some of them, like Monza especially, was kind of undeserved in a way, and Charles just put in a fantastic tire-saving performance to be able to win that one. But I think if Ferrari has a good car that is able to compete, I think Charles easily has the ability to win a championship. And I think this is kind of the one year that he has to take advantage of the fact that Lewis is going to be a little bit slow to get up to speed, because I think come 2026, it might be a different story. So I have Charles winning. I am nowhere near confident on this. I went back and forth with him and Lando a lot. And I think this one came down to partially my head, but also more so my heart. I think if Charles won it and I didn't predict him to win it, I would be kind of more sad than if he ended up not winning. So yeah, that's where I'm at. That is my stake in the ground, and I'm hoping I'm right, because I would love to see this man realize his childhood dream, but we shall see. We shall see how he handles it, because 2022, while that was mainly Ferrari falling apart, Charles also fell apart at a few races too. But I think he's managed to iron that out of his system, and so I think he's ready. And so that's why I have him winning this year. So that is my full drivers' predictions, 1 to 21. Let me know in the comments down below how you have the drivers finishing this year. I am not confident at all. Moving over to the constructors, I'll try and go through this quickly. In P10, I have Sauber. I just don't have enough faith that they will have improved the car enough to be able to finish any higher than this, especially if the focus is shifted to 2026. P9, I have Racing Bulls, because I have no faith in them operationally in either car development or car creation or strategy. Yuki, I expect to do his best, but I'm not sure about Isaac. P8, I have Williams, and I think there will be a bit of a gap between Williams and Racing Bulls. I think with the new and improved driver lineup at Williams, they'll be able to get a lot more out of that car and get more points than they have in years past. P7, I have Haas. This is where they finished in 2024 as well, and they seem to have figured something out with that car and were able to put in pretty consistent points finishes throughout 2024. I do see Esteban and Ollie Behrman as a step up in the driver lineup, so I think they should be able to do about the same as they did in 2024. P6, I have Aston Martin. This one I might actually be least confident in because I could see them finishing even lower than this because the car development has been going in the exact opposite direction. I do think that bringing on Newey will help towards the later end of the year, but I think Newey's focus is going to be on 2026. So once again, whatever car Aston Martin kind of starts with is the car I'm going to expect for them to kind of carry out through the whole season. But I do think that Fernando Alonso is talented enough that he could probably get them to this position single-handedly. P5, I have Alpine. Contrary to years past, I'm starting to have a little bit more faith in their engineering team. We saw Gasly's improved pace at the end of 2024. And there's also the addition of Flavio Briatore to that team, and you just never know what kinds of shenanigans that man is going to do. You do know that there will likely be cheating involved. So I see the Alpine team being much improved from years past, and I think these are kind of the last years that they have with this Renault engine now that they're going to be switching to, I believe, a Mercedes engine into 2026. And so yeah, I think they'll figure something out and be able to kind of get to the top of that midfield. P4 is a team that's going to be in no man's land again, and that is Mercedes. I just think they're going to have the weakest car of the top 4 teams, and so this is going to be about where they finish. In P3, I have Red Bull. I think they're going to carry on the performance that they had at the end of 2024. And so over the course of the season, I don't see them getting as many wins as the 2 teams ahead of them. In P2, I went back and forth on this as well, but I think looking at my driver standings and where I had placed people there, I just don't think that this is going to be anyone other than McLaren. If Lando manages to win over Charles, I think it'll be close. So I think it's going to be Oscar that might cost them this. I think I see Charles and Lewis being talented enough to drag that Ferrari team to the constructors win. Ferrari almost did it in 2024, even with probably the 3rd fastest car if you consider the whole season. So I think with 2 world-class talent drivers, I think they'll be able to make it work. So that's why I have Ferrari in the top spot. I do think that a lot of the championship order in both the drivers and the constructors is going to come down to DNFs this year. I think we've seen the cars have become a lot more reliable, but if there's any battles and DNFs that occur, I think those are going to be the thing that defines the championship order. It's going to be so close between Ferrari and McLaren again this year, and I'm glad that it's kind of gone back to a very historic rivalry between the 2 teams and my top 2 teams, or at least my favorite team of years past and my favorite team of now. So yeah, should be interesting, and I'm excited to see where this season goes. As always, I like to make 3 hot take predictions for the overall season, any random things that I think might happen. This year, I have the prediction that there will be at least 2 driver swaps by summer break. One of these, obviously, is Jack Doohan, who I think will be swapped out for Franco Colapinto. I think this is just kind of already written in the stars. But my other prediction is, unfortunately, for Isaac Hadjar. I am a little bit worried for him. There is a very exciting young talent named Arvid Lindblad coming up, and if he manages to do well in F2 and Isaac is struggling in F1, they might want to swap them sooner rather than later. So that's kind of where my head is with that. The other driver swap potential could be Liam Lawson if he doesn't perform in that Red Bull. So he might get swapped out for one of the Racing Bulls drivers, or one of the other rookies could vastly underperform. You just never know. 1 is likely and 2 is possible. So that's where I'm going with that prediction. My second hot take, and this one might be pretty wild. I think that 5 different teams are going to win a race in 2025. I think it's pretty clear that Red Bull, McLaren, and Ferrari are all going to win a race. I think Mercedes should be able to scrape out 1 or 2. And then I am hoping that, like 2020 and 2021, we are going to get a absolutely wild, out of left field win from someone. My prediction is going to be Pierre Gasly in that Alpine. He'll be able to do something special with it, but it could be anyone on the grid. At the tail end of regulations, you sometimes see with the closeness of the teams that someone can kind of squeak something out here or there. Likely it's going to be at a Monaco or a Hungary or a really wet race, although pretty well every single wet race of the past 10 years have all gone Max's direction, so it might be less likely there, but I think we're due for a shock win, and so I'm hoping that it will come this year. And my third hot take is I think that the championship battle will be settled before Abu Dhabi. I think a lot of people are expecting it to go the full distance and us to have that fight for that last race, but I don't know. I just get the feeling that maybe it might not be as close as we're all expecting. So that's kind of where I'm going with that one. So that means that both the constructors and the drivers will be settled before Abu Dhabi. That's kind of where I'm sitting with that. I'm hoping this doesn't happen. I would love it if the last race decided it, but yeah, I think it's not going to be as close as people think it will be. So that's where I'm going with that one. So those are my 2025 F1 season predictions. Let me know in the comments down below if you agree with my predictions, if I'm way off on anybody, how you have the top 5 drivers finishing, because honestly, that's what we all care about. And yeah, I feel like I'm going to regret these ones, but we'll see. I'm hoping that these drivers can prove me right. Excited for the season to start up. We're about a week away from things really starting to pick up, and I'm really excited for it. I've been missing F1 desperately these past few months, and glad to have something planned for my weekends again. Toodles.